Welcome to Acumentis Acumen, the property podcast that delivers expert insights and answers to your burning industry questions. Join our property valuers monthly as they distill their wisdom into each episode. It's your compass in the ever-evolving real estate world. Let's get started on the next episode.
Welcome back to Acumentis Acumen. I'm your host, Amy Purchase, and today we're diving into the fascinating yet often confusing topic of carbon farming. And I'm joined by three Acumentis experts in the field: Lachlan Dunsdon, National Director of Agribusiness, Jack Macdonald, Senior Valuer, and Ross Sharp, State Director of Agribusiness in WA. Thank you all for being here today. Lockie, can you kick us off by explaining what carbon farming is, please?
Sure, thanks Amy. So carbon farming is a change in management on rural land. Depending on where you are, different methodologies will apply, but it's a change in management that will result in either one, a reduction in the amount of carbon you emit or your property or enterprise emits, or it's the sequestration, which means storage of carbon from the atmosphere in either the soil or trees generally. And if you undertake that change in management, which is a permanent change, but if you undertake that in line with approved Commonwealth Government frameworks, then you can be awarded Australian carbon credit units, or an ACU. That is a commodity within itself. Now that can be held on your own balance sheet or it can be sold, and that process is known as carbon farming.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lockie. Ross, can you tell us about the different types of carbon farming and which is most commonly implemented?
Yes. Well, Amy, look, there's a few types. Being from WA, the most common we have in WA, probably still the most common across Australia for the amount of land it takes up, is human-induced regeneration, or HIR. And it mainly is seen in the pastoral lease land, so that it involves partial destocking, better management of feral animals, improving your fencing, and allowing the existing vegetation to re-establish itself. The principle is that you generate ACUs and reimbursement from the emissions reduction fund, offset the loss in income from reduced stock numbers. So technically it's a win for the environment and a win for the leasehold owner with an alternate income source. And this is very common in WA for the major miners and resource emitters. And they generally want to do their own projects as opposed to just purchasing the ACUs. The second method is planting trees and vegetation. And this is generally on agricultural land, but sections of agricultural land that's less well suited to cropping or grazing. And in the early days, it was predominantly monocultures. It might have been blue gums or mallees, but in more recent years, there's been a greater sort of emphasis on biodiversity, and there's better demand for your ACUs if your project is far more biodiverse. Third method is soil carbon, and that's basically taking carbon from the atmosphere through plants and going back into the soil and maintaining it. And from what I can understand, it seems better suited to higher rainfall areas. So we don't see as much of it here in Western Australia, but certainly it's understand it's quite popular on the East Coast. And fourthly, you can look at the forestry side. There's plenty of commercial forestry plantations that are designed to be grown and cut down, but you don't have to cut them down, and by leaving them there, they will sequester carbon, and by that way, you can generate ACUs and be paid for actually not harvesting that crop. And the last one is savanna burning, and that's basically taking out extreme fire events by better management due to fire on your pastoral grazing areas.
Great. Thanks for the overview, Ross. Jack, for farmers that are interested in carbon farming, how can they determine if their farm has potential?
Yeah, so generally the typical farmer doesn't actually know. You have to engage with various groups called carbon project developers, and they can map your property and identify if there's any potential there.
Excellent. And once a farmer decides if they'd like to progress and explore a carbon farming project, what are the key steps that they need to take?
Yeah, so there's a couple of steps that must be taken, and ideally we would suggest the identification and pre-feasibility, looking at your before and after scenarios. So what type of farm do I have now and what will I have afterwards? Design the project, register the project, manage the project through hurdles called reporting periods to earn carbon credits, and keep records of management on your property and maintain the project and the carbon.
Great. Thanks for the comprehensive overview there. And Lockie, a critical question for farmers considering a carbon project is, how will this impact the value of my farm?
Sure. So, Amy, I guess every farm will be different, and the way the project is designed and implemented on your farm will vary. So there's no general rules of thumb, but you can, by implementing a carbon farming project, create an additional revenue stream for your farm, and certainly one that is diverse from what would be traditionally primary production, seasonal related income streams. So carbon farming can create that alternate credit stream that produces a commodity that you can either hold and accrue value that way, or you can sell it. Obviously, there's a tendency for some of these farms to hold their carbon credits and present themselves or the commodity that they produce as carbon neutral. But all farmers need to be aware that you are registering or you're allowing another interest in your land, and there will be a change of use. You will take agricultural land and generally create it into a carbon farming project, which is different, and that's viewed differently within the market. Obviously, different methods are viewed differently within the market, and they have different impacts on the value of your land. And that can be as extreme as, drastic changes of use from primary production to 100% carbon farming with really no ag at all. Or you go to the other end of the extreme and say a soil carbon project, which is generally quite complementary of agriculture. So everyone will vary. It's important that you are across the detail, and that when you are considering one, that it's well designed and well suited to, one, your property, two, your business, but three, give consideration to, if you were ever to sell that property and that carbon project, how that would be received within the market.
Yeah, thanks, Lockie. Some valuable insights there and key things to consider for anyone interested. To wrap up this episode, Ross, could you talk to some of the services that Acumentis offer in the carbon farming space?
Right, yeah, quite broad. But probably our main one is we look at the pre and the post carbon project property valuation guidance. As valuers, we're regularly looking at the carbon market and also the best way of sequestering carbon. Had to deal with a lot of variation in 2021. A tonne of Acu, or an Acu was worth $22 a tonne. In 2022, it was $57 a tonne, and in 2023, we're now at $32 a tonne. So obviously that variation has a significant impact on the value of projects. Secondly, we'll look at just carbon farming project income streams, and ultimately this involves determining a net present value of carbon income streams and offsetting this against the modified rural income and land values. And like Lockie alluded to, there is a change in use, and that's got to be factored in. You don't just have what you have plus carbon on top. There is a change, so we've got to get into that. We provide a lot of guidance to banks on the added value of carbon projects, and also they'll require mortgagee consent if they're going to register a carbon project over a property. And in WA, we do a lot of assistance to carbon emitters who are looking to purchase land for carbon projects. And we do notice there is an emphasis on the main emitters to actually take the land and develop it with a carbon project, as opposed to just buying acres on the international market. And I suppose finally, as a company, we don't have all the answers, but we certainly put a lot of time into working out where we're at in this space. It's very new. It's changing. As valuers, we don't make the market, we interpret the market. But we certainly get heavily involved with groups that are involved in this space. And in addition to carbon, there's environmental offsets and other areas. And we try and keep ourselves at the forefront of this very dynamic area.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all for sharing your knowledge on the topic today. Lockie, Jack and Ross, you've certainly helped to make what is a complex topic a bit more digestible for me and hopefully for all of our listeners. So for anyone interested, if you'd like to learn more about carbon farming, head over to the Acumentis website, acumentis.com.au, and stay tuned next time.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Acumentis Acumen. Tune into next month's podcast for another topical discussion. Like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of Acumentis Acumen. Catch you in the next one.